Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. Carasoft Technology would like to welcome you to our ServiceNow Public Sector Tech Talk, Modernizing Federal PPBE, Connecting Strategy to Execution with ServiceNow Strategic Portfolio Management. Before we get started, I would like to quickly go over a few housekeeping items. Please note that all lines have been muted to reduce any kind of background noise during the presentation. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please use the Q&A feature on the bottom of your screen, and we will do our best to answer by the end of the presentation or follow up with you offline. This webinar is being recorded and a copy will be emailed to you. Just to tell you a little bit about Carasoft, we are a trusted government IT solutions provider supporting public sector organizations across federal, state, and local government agencies, including education and healthcare markets. At this time, I'd like to hand the floor over to our speakers. Sarah, the floor is all yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for joining us for our discussion today. We're excited to have everyone hop on. If you're just joining us, we're aligning ServiceNow strategic portfolio management to the process that all our organizations and agencies go through to define their plan, execute, budget, and align resources to our current year and out year planning aligned to our strategic goals. We always share a safe harbor notice in all of our sessions, just aligning to that we may be talking about some future release features. We may be talking about some things that are on our roadmap. So we just shared that we may be sharing some forward-looking statements, and we cannot confirm at this moment if they're available in the next release, but we will be sharing details throughout the session. My name is Sarah Ciano. I'm a solution specialist here at ServiceNow in support of our federal and DoD customers. Lynette Herbst is my direct partner in support of strategic portfolio management. We align with customers across a whole host of organizations and agencies. Hear lots of use cases, and we're excited to have this discussion with all of you here today. Just a note on our agenda, we are going to be hearing or touching on what we hear from agencies related to their PPBE process today and challenges, align that to feature and functionality within strategic portfolio management, understand what really is entailed within strategic portfolio management, which is a strategic planning, alignment across your stakeholders, and delivery all on the ServiceNow platform. And then we'll get into showing some of those feature and functionalities within our demonstration. To get started, again, PPBE, planning, programming, budgeting, and execution. Agencies have been using this for decades. This was originally defined by the Department of Defense, and while some organizations are still using how that's evolved over the years, all organizations have a process where they're defining what they're doing this current fiscal year, going to request that budget, having collaboration with Congress and other parts of their organizations to understand what is it that we want to do from a strategic planning perspective, define those programs, align the budget that we do receive, and then execute and show back how we've used that budget that we did get approved for. Across the agencies and companies that we work with, we hear a lot of the pain points that you see here on the screen. So we're hearing lack of transparency, data silos across what everyone's working on across the organization. If I'm being told I don't have the budget or resource to do something, I'm not able to see, how other work is taking precedent over me or how that's aligning to our organization's strategic priorities. Data silos. I don't have real information, or I need to go dig and find out what we did with a project that we did before. We're constantly doing data calls and waiting on people and responses to help make informed decisions, manual workflows. So even if we do have some defined processes, it may be very cumbersome. And then again, meetings and decisions can take time that we may or may not have when we need to react and make a pivot with what we plan to do. And then just misalignment to strategy. Is everything we're working on for the right reasons and aligned to what our agency or organization is responsible to do? The more transparency we can bring across the board, it helps us refine, what we're doing, or if we need to make a change, what makes the most sense to prioritize as we go forward. I'd like to pause there for all of our attendees to answer a poll. We're going to go ahead and put that up here in a moment, but we're curious for everyone who's on, what are the challenges, that you see here on the screen? Which one is the most impacting your current process, your current planning and budgeting for this current year and out years? And we'll give it a couple seconds for everyone to be able to respond. Just a couple more seconds. Okay. So actually, it's pretty spread across the board. The highest response was data silos, which we do hear often at 45%, but right behind it at 36%, lack of transparency. So we do see that a lot within organizations as well, or hear that from the customers that we've worked with. How do we understand, what we all are working on, and how are we able to collaborate together and be more efficient? And then right behind that is misalignment to agency strategy. So are we able to measure, what we're doing against what all the good work we're doing? And everybody's working hard, but is it aligned to what our overall mission is? So we'll get into some details there. So thank you so much for those responses. And we will, go ahead and get into some more details here. So strategic portfolio management does align to PPBE, just logically, we're planning to do something. It's aligned to our strategic priorities. We have a purpose and reason why we're executing certain projects and missions. But with strategic portfolio management, we can see that across the board, see how certain projects and efforts are impacting other, things that are happening within our organization. We can, because we're getting that, transparency, we're able to help make more informed decisions faster. We're able to agree and align on why things need to get prioritized, put in additional, assessment within the platform to be able to get feedback across stakeholders so everyone agrees on certain decisions. And then from your execution perspective, you're able to understand where do we really stand in our current projects. It's not necessarily a data call in that respect either. You're getting real-time information about actual execution, how things are going, how that's impacting what you had planned to do. Are we over allocated on resources or budget, which is again going to impact other work and other decisions we had planned to do for this year or for out years. And then also with that in mind, we're also able to evaluate, pivot, when we report back on how we spent the budget, we have real information. It's not taking us, an excess amount of time to be able to report on that information, which allows us to continue to move forward and be efficient and align more strategically to our current priorities, and even maybe add on to those priorities and refine them as you go forward. So again, we just want to paint the picture of there's a lot that's part of that decision planning execution process. So overall, within strategic portfolio management, we're able to align the strategy to value through being able to define strategic priorities in the platform, align key performance indicators and goals to what you want to do. When we talk about strategic roadmap planning, we're understanding, when and why we think we should plan to do something, aligning those stakeholders, as we mentioned. Does everyone agree that these take priority and that these should align where they are within the planning process? Is it this year or next year? Where do we put budget where we expect to be able to execute and align the resources and hire additional staff to be able to do things? Again, agree on that, being able to see that across the board and across portfolios and across project submission. We're able to see and say, leadership agrees that these things make the most sense. They're most impactful to our organization. They're going to get the biggest output across what our agency is responsible to do. We're able to also, when things come up, be able to say, we know this takes priority and something else has to shift, but how does that actually impact the things that we are still important, but we just have to put them on hold for a moment? How does that line from our continuous planning? As I said, when things shift, doesn't mean that we're not necessarily going to do them, just maybe something came up, or maybe we're able to complete something before we expected. So therefore able to put more items in our roadmap and our strategic priorities alignment, additional tasks and projects, we're able to pull those forward in the planning process. And then also from an execution perspective, you're able to see full transparency with the different methodologies on the platform. So we support all kinds of project execution from waterfall to agile safe. We're able to do those on the platform. So then therefore the people executing can do what they need to do, but leadership and the people making decisions about where budget is allocated are able to see that health of the projects and be able to continue to make those plans or make those plans when we have to make a change and be more informed about what's the true status. And again, it's all cyclical. So we're continuing every year to refine how are we doing this calendar year or this fiscal year? How are we going to pivot and make a change for the future? How are we able to bring in things that come up that were not part of the original plan into the fold and understand, where they can fit within the budget and resources that we need to align to this effort? And of course, that aligns to the PPBE process as well. You're continuing to align that initial planning to policy, executive orders, what the agency is responsible to do and their strategic initiatives. You're continuing to align certain projects and efforts aligned to that original plan, or when things come out, how do we stand up this tiger team to address whatever issue that we uncovered that we didn't expect, align that budget that when we are programming and getting approval for the budget, once we get that allocation, how can we tie that to the specific efforts? And of course, from an execution perspective, get real-time information about how things are going. Are we aligned to the plan from a budget and resource perspective, or do we need to make some decisions? From there, I will pass it over to Lynette. We'll get into some details about the feature functionality within strategic portfolio management aligned to PPBE. And then we will come back and review some questions and some additional resources at the end.
Thanks, Sarah. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, wherever you may be. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to share a demo with you to kind of send home what Sarah had said in the slides. So the biggest value here is that transparency and visibility, right? And with that information, we are able to understand what everyone is doing throughout the process. So there's different roles and responsibilities within this entire process, but it's giving that picture or that transparency to everyone, and it's helping to break down those data silos. Also, from a data perspective, having real-time dashboards and information that you can use for briefing or just check in on how we're doing from the entire process, right? So it gives you that full picture instead of, having to ask others for their statuses to maybe satisfy those data calls that are coming in and, of course, disrupting everyone's day. So starting with the planning piece of this, so within the strategic planning workspace, the goals framework, the complete goals framework that allow you to identify your strategic priorities and programs, your goals and your targets to those things, right? So I know that this is a requirement and everyone is doing it today, but we may be doing that, in PowerPoint or in Excel or having some sort of connection to the investments that we're making. But this gives you a little bit more meat behind what's actually happening, where you are, and where you might need to go. So just starting off with the dashboard, this is one of many that you'll see.
Lynette, we can't see your screen at the moment. If you could just pull that up.
Oh,
Okay, here we go. I see it. Go ahead.
you do? Does everyone else see it? Because to me, I'm sharing.
Looks good.
It looks good.
Okay, good. Okay, so looking at the dashboards and identifying the status, how we're making progress. other little widgets to give you information. You know, we have some without targets, or we have some where work isn't actually aligned to the goals that we've set forward. Also managing those strategic priorities. So are we hitting the mark on the strategic priorities as far as the investments that we're making? Um, and then from a list view or hierarchical view, whichever you choose, being able to see all of those goals and their respective targets, right? So putting numbers behind the actual goals so we can make sure that we're hitting the mark that we said we would make, right? So with this, we're also able to understand how we're progressing as far as the investments that we're making. And also gives us insights from a collaboration perspective on where we might need to take some action here, right? So action in the form of, you know, these goals that are at 0%, how do we start to kick those forward? Action also using AI in the future to, in the near future with our upcoming roadmaps, to be able to provide insights to those goals owners and give them an opportunity to identify the investments that they could be making that would help push these goals forward. So from the planning perspective, it also goes down to those capability gaps that we need to be able to fill. So what are our current capabilities and what do we need to put forward in order to continue to grow and meet those goals and strategic priorities, right? So within strategic planning, you're also met with prioritization, or I like to call it the backlog. And the backlog can consist of all types of different work items. We're calling them planning items. But here we have examples of projects and demands. But if you're an agile or a safe team, you're able to look at epics in this lens as well. When we're talking about safe, features and capabilities can be included in here also, right? So what are all of the things that we need to do within our roadmap, and what are we making decisions on to prioritize, and what is kind of waiting in the wings in the backlog? The other advantage with this is it gives that full picture of everything that we have going on. We know we can't do everything at once, but we have access to be able to quickly pivot to those different things, right? So when we talk about this prioritization, we want to make sure that everything is in one place so we can make those decisions. Then, as we get into programming, making those decisions on prioritization, one based on scoring. So, being able to score each of the investments as they're coming in, so you can get an idea of that prioritization and the right things at the right time, right? So, this is meant as a collaborative workspace. All of strategic planning is. Regardless of your role and responsibility, everybody has a play in this, right? So, using something like the scoring board to be able to talk to your stakeholders and have them make decisions based on what they know to come up with that overall score or prioritization, if you will. So within here, this example is the RICE score, reach, impact, confidence, effort. But we also have flexibility to create your own scoring framework. So effort to value, WSJF if you're using SAFE. You know, being able to determine what your calculations need to be in order to help you prioritize. This is also speaking to those data-driven decisions. So we're able to show people this is why, you know, your project landed in the rank that it landed in, right? So we get a lot of complaints sometimes that, hey, I asked first, or mine is more critical than the next guy's. But this is really giving you backup data to say this is why we're moving forward with the plan that we've decided on. Okay. Also, with that programming piece, we need to make sure that we have the resources to manage the work that we said we were going to manage, right? So in a given time frame, we have timelines of priorities and work items that we need to work on. But we also need to understand, do we actually have the capacity to do this work? So based on different roles or groups of folks, or even by skill set, we want to understand what everyone is allocated to now and if they actually have the bandwidth to do what we're asking them to do. This is a very unrealistic picture of a heat map where it's all green here, but need to consider that, there are times when everyone is over allocated, right? So it's always been a challenge to take that availability and capacity from a resource perspective and make sure that we have the right people at the right time to do the work, right? This, like the scoring and prioritization, is also that visibility that you can give folks as to why you can or cannot do something, right? So we can use this data-driven decision making to say, we don't have enough resources to do this if you can pretend that everything you see here is red, or at least some of it. So we don't have the resources to do this. So either we need to put something as far as the work we're planning to do on the back burner, or we need to ask for more resources, right? So again, that data backup to the needs of the organization. So programming, then getting into budgeting or financials, right? So within the financials piece, we're looking overall at a program or at a portfolio, multiple portfolios across our strategic planning workspace. So when we talk about tracking that funding, what are our plan costs and what are our actual costs, and how do we use that information to encourage budget, right? So we're pulling in budget targets here so that we can look at all of the plan costs that have been submitted by those project managers. We're looking at a program level and we're understanding what the needs are from a budget perspective. So when we're talking about the execution year, we can look at that budget, the forecast, those actuals as the project is going through as the project is in flight. But then when we talk about that out year planning, we're also able to use those plan costs, whether labor or non-labor, to determine what we need to ask for from a POM perspective. So again, all of that data is in front of us and allows us to pick and choose or create scenarios, which I will share with you soon, in order to manage, what we're doing today, what we're planning to do in the future, and where we need to pivot based on different scenarios as they come up, right? Okay. And then as we get into the execution, being able to track on the roadmap, right? So when we're looking at the roadmap, we're able to understand, quickly where we are from a status perspective as it relates to red, yellow, green. We can also see the breakdown of the investments here in the middle based on, again, our role and responsibility. So looking at strategic priority and primary goal, I'm leadership that wants to understand how my investments fall into those different areas, right? How do I align to that DoD strategy or my agency or the armed forces strategy that I'm a part of, right? So being able to visualize that in different ways. Within here as well, you can group by different attributes, if you will. So based on those projects and demands and the data that we're capturing at those levels, we're able to slice and dice this information and look at it in different ways. Maybe I'm more on the enterprise architecture side and I want to see how it affects my business applications and my capabilities. Or I'm looking across department or mission units, being able to change the visualization here again based on the information that you care about, right? So just as an example, I switched over to priority. Now I'm looking at this view from a prioritization perspective. Also being able to track from those projects and demands as they're being worked on by those project managers, right? So looking at the investments, understanding the milestones, and if we're actually hitting the milestones, the percent complete, again, the status, some financial information. These are all rolling up from the work that's being done at the project level. So it gives that visibility and understanding on how we're doing, but it also allows you to drill in and get to that additional information that you may need. Again, based on your role, what you care about, you can get as few or as many details as you need to by drilling into this roadmap here. Commonality here as well. So we recommend briefing from the roadmap, but we know that so many times that's just not a possibility, right? So within here, we're also able to export my entire strategic plan to PowerPoint, and you can socialize that out automatically through the system, through notifications. But really, this gives you the opportunity to scale to what SPM can give you. And that is that, briefing right out of the system versus doing an export to PowerPoint, that where the data is not real time as soon as you do that export, right? But having that capability here, because it's definitely still needed across our customers, the DoD and intel agencies. Okay, so we went through that planning, the programming, the budget as it relates to those financials, and the roadmap, the capturing the roadmap and being able to have everything connected. So you can see here how everything being here allows you to create different scenarios and decisions so that you can quickly pivot or do, your reviews throughout the year. So how are the projects we actually prioritize actually performing? So we can see that information. What are we doing from a financials perspective? Are we over budget with some of our projects that we're working on? So as we're creating those scenarios, we are able to, hold on, sorry, we're able to create multiple scenarios for multiple different situations. So maybe it's from a prioritization perspective. So we have things that we've prioritized, but something new has come into play that is much more critical. It needs to go to the top of the list. How do we make that transition from a prioritization perspective to say, hey, we're going to take this one off the board and this one off the board in order to make room for whatever is new, right? So that's a example from a prioritization perspective. Also, that financial piece, right? So when we're looking at financials, we have a budget shift. We lose some resources. Um, we need to kind of accommodate for we lost a handful of budget. So what are we going to do instead? And this giving you the visibility into the budget forecast, the actuals that are out there as well, to make those decisions on, financially, which things to keep and which things to continue to work through. And then by creating those different scenarios, it helps you to look across the board at, what you need to be doing. So in this sense, we're creating scenarios for a POM submission and in out years, right? We could also have a timeline shift, or that one I mentioned, we lost budget. How do we quickly create those scenarios and allow for that shift? It also helps when, you're looking through the information and it's UFOR time, right? So we have UFORs that we can accommodate. Let's look at our capacity, our financials, and our current roadmap and see where we can't pull in those UFORs, right? And then just to cover off on this, how does everything get up to this level, when we're looking across the program, an organization, a portfolio, or multiple portfolios, where does all of this come from? And it comes back to those demands and projects and even epics, right? So all of that work being done at that level is what's rolling up and giving you that full picture of that cyclical process, right? So, what are we executing on? What new things are coming in? And where do we need to pivot on those types of things? So, that's what strategic planning is offering for the process as a means of, that transparency, that data transparency, and that reducing those silos, and of course, that strategic connection. Wanted to share with you here dashboard capabilities within strategic planning as well. So it goes across the areas that we mentioned, We're talking, about financials or those milestones that may be affecting the progress of our projects. Are we actually making it through? Risk and issues, as well as capacities. So dashboards to be able to understand what we look like from a strategic plan perspective, how we're managing that information, looking across those financials and understanding at that quick glance, where we are as far as, budget versus actuals and how we're managing our financial information and our financial data. And then just to tie off on the risk issue decision, so tying back those risks as it relates to the projects that are in flight or even some precursor risks as it relates to demands, right? So pulling in those risk issues, decisions, and understanding holistically as a program where we are across the board. And of course, I know probably most, if not all of you know on the phone that all of our dashboards are drillable. So to be able to get to these details, you are able to select and again, go as deep as you need to into the details of what the issue might be. Okay. And then finally, just to speak from a project perspective. So I mentioned that roll up, and I just want to share an example with you of, where this is happening from the project perspective and what types of approvals and workflows are included between here and that strategic planning. So if I jump into one of my projects here, I'm met with that traditional work breakdown structure. This is an example of a hybrid project, meaning some waterfall while the execution piece is happening in an agile fashion. But what you would expect to see here and manage from a Gantt chart view, those milestones, identifying the milestones, critical path and baselines as well. Also templates. So being able to apply templates here from a governance perspective, or even a repeatable project perspective. If we're applying templates, that work breakdown structure is filled out for that project manager, saving a lot of time and effort to manage that with each new project. Within here too, at the project level, is resource management. So this resource management is speaking directly to that capacity available at the strategic planning level, right? So as all of our resources, whether groups, roles, skill sets, they have a capacity to do work, but they've also been assigned work. And we can understand where they might be over allocated, or where they might be available. Also, the resource management workflow within here allows a project manager to request a resource that gets sent off to that resource manager, and that resource manager can kind of look across the board at all of those groups or roles and understand who is allocated, who's over allocated, who's under allocated to try to balance that information out. So we're giving visibility to the project manager here, but we're applying that workflow and approval process from a governance perspective, to make sure that the right resources are being assigned the right projects. So within here as well, being able to understand what other work the resource might be working on. So if they're working on multiple different projects for multiple different people, maybe it's that data backing, being able to do some negotiations, right? My project is a higher priority. Can we discuss, flopping these hours, but that more visibility and transparency within the process. So with those resources, I'm going to just jump over here. So we're able to see all the resources that have been assigned to the project, but now from the project, we're looking at it from the lens of the resource manager. So as we're looking, the resource manager again can look against all of the different roles and the work that folks are doing, understand where Mark is over allocated, and maybe reallocate other folks that have time. So the project manager is not seeing, you know, everyone within a group, we can see maybe we have um, another resource within the same group that Mark is in that is not over allocated. So we can make that switch there. So from a financial perspective, again, as it goes back to that PPBE, allowing the project manager to develop plan costs as it relates to labor and non-labor costs. So by creating different cost plans here, you are able to submit that to that higher level, that program level view, so that they can understand what type of budget you're going to need, and then make that decision to allocate budget to you, right? So through this process, there's some governance around the budget approval process, but we're allowing that information to flow up from the project manager to those program managers and then essentially receive budget, based on whatever the results of that POM was, right? And then the risk issues, decisions, that roll up that I just shared with you from a dashboard perspective is also coming from here. So we're identifying risks across individual projects, but then and we're rolling that up into a better view, to look across the program in general. Being able to see that and use it as data-driven decisions on for these risks, what are we going to do? Are we going to are we going to mitigate them? Or are they okay to sit where they are? How do we view it holistically from a program level view, so that we don't get into a critical situation by having a risk that could impact a critical project. um, with each also dashboards within each project as well. So configurable dashboards, what you need. Um, I mentioned it earlier, but dashboards at every step, that quick glance, drastically reducing those needs for data calls because everything is here on the platform as needed. A couple of things I didn't mention here, within financials, and this is true for the roll up as well. So we're able to visualize financials from a cost type and or an expense type perspective. So these cost types can be your color of money. So when we're talking about RDT&E, O&M, MILPER, procurement, having those cost types so that you're able to see this information as needed, right? There's also integrations here with other financial systems. We know a lot of organizations have source information from some of their internal financial systems, and we're able to integrate with those through APIs. Or we can integrate from an import-export perspective. So financials here at the project level, financials at the program level, can be exported to Excel, CSV, and imported into those other systems, and vice versa from those other systems. Okay, so I'm I'm gonna stop here, cover off here, and I'm looking for any questions within the Q&A before we jump off the demo piece. Sarah, I don't know if we have any yet, but happy to answer any questions as it relates to what we just discussed.
There's no current questions in the chat related to anything you did not cover. However, I do have a question for the group. When we were talking about, that initial poll, like where do we align? There was a couple of responses of, data silos and transparency. Is there any questions about kind of like the initial planning about, can we show transparency across directorates or anything like that? Does anyone have any questions that are kind of a follow-up to that initial poll? And then a follow-up question that I had also is when we talked about the strategic planning, which is you teed it up nicely, Lynette, have that pulled back up. When we're talking about defining our strategic plan and then getting into execution, are you currently, a question for the group, please post in the chat, yes or no. Are you currently aligning project execution to strategic goals with any sort of measurement? Are you saying, how far are we in accomplishing our goal for this year? Are we filling up the bucket? Are you tying the project execution to specific strategic initiatives for the agency or organization? Just post yes or no in the chat. While we're waiting for some responses to roll in, if we want to just look at strategic planning, I know there was a few different ways that we talked about being able to see the information, sort, if it's not by primary goal and priority, maybe it's by business application. If we want to show some additional features in this viewpoint, I think that that would be a good time to just focus on that as well. See a couple of responses rolling in. It seems like there's a mixed review. Some people are saying that they're tracking goals, but maybe not transparency with feedback. I had a no. So some people are maybe mixed across the board if they're tracking, execution aligned to strategic priorities. Maybe there's some more here that we can show that would help with capabilities. So if we're looking at our roadmap, we're seeing across the top additional fiscal years. We're looking at strategic priorities. So we have large efforts, ERP consolidation, inclusive hiring, big initiatives that we're working on as an organization. We're seeing that by our primary goal, but there's different ways to slice and dice the information. You're able to see, as you have tracking mode turned on, there's obviously the milestones on each strategic priority, but there's also an option to see like potential impacts. Obviously, we see how far we're progressed within the strategic priority across the board. Lynette, is there anything else that you hear from customers that you would want to show in the strategic planning workspace?
I mean, the only thing that we didn't talk about, I mean, we talked about that breaking it down in multiple different ways, but also creating dependencies. So a lot of times we get questions on, we have a lot of trouble understanding dependencies with cross-functional teams or even across portfolios. So, one portfolio is doing one activity, but we don't really know what they're doing, right? So we have another activity, and now it's like, oh my gosh, we're impacting what they're doing, or vice versa. So with the strategic planning, you're able to create plans across those portfolios, and then identify where you have those dependencies, and again, use that as a collaboration tool to say, hey, portfolio A, this is portfolio B, let's talk about this, because I think we want to avoid any critical impacts to either one of us, right? So again, it's more of that transparency and visibility to know what we're doing across the organization and with our cross-functional teams that could impact each other. And again, I think this is the third time I've said it, but also breaking down those silos, if you will, to give everyone that complete picture.
Yep. Yep. Good point. Okay. I don't see any other questions in the chat. So if you have anything else that you wanted to show, we can do that or pass it back to me.
If there are no more questions, I'm happy to pass it back, Sarah. Thanks everyone for your time today.
So just pulling back up, just some final thoughts. So, oh, okay, there we go. So appreciate everyone's feedback and joining us today. We hope that this prompts some thoughts about how you're doing strategic plan or your strategic plans today, how ServiceNow can support you getting the insights and getting that more proactive transparency across your organization, being able to use the platform to work more efficiently across other stakeholders that you align to. We do have a couple of upcoming workshops. We have a strategic portfolio management webinar coming up in a few weeks, which goes a lot deeper into strategic portfolio management feature functionality. And then we also have a mastering IT investment session with enterprise architecture and asset management as key points and getting insights across those specific applications and assets. We also
Yeah.
have,
And
go ahead.
Sarah, just real quick, sorry to mention, the dates for those you'll see once you click in, but they're December 10th and 11th. Strategic port or EAM and ITAM is the 10th and SPM is the 11th.
Yes, good
Just
point.
to
Thank you.
let you know.
And then we also have our best practices site that we'll be sharing out to everyone who registered today. So it offers a lot of key feature functionality, some drill down and process guides that are good tools to have at your fingertips. And then we also have our microsites, which do talk about additional use cases aligned to strategic portfolio management and enterprise architecture. So everyone will have access to these links post session. So thank you for the great attendance and conversation today. We appreciate everyone's time and we look forward to seeing you next time.